Hi guys, welcome to the second episode of the Digital Health Digest series. Today I have joining me Liam Cahill. Hi Liam, how are you?
Hello, it's great to be here. I'm well, thank you.
Great to have you. I thought I would start off by giving a brief introduction to yourself, although I hope I do it justice, but feel free to jump in if I get anything wrong. But essentially, Liam, you're a healthcare strategist and advisor. You founded Together Digital, but prior to this, you also co-founded a well-regarded social enterprise that's helped the NHS improve medicine and prescribing. You've worked with national bodies, local systems, and healthcare and health tech companies across the UK, guiding them through digital impacts and innovation needed within health and social care. That is just a very brief description. I know that you do lots more than that. Is there any specific examples that you want to draw from, or anything you want to add to that brief description?
No, I think you've done it justice largely. I'd say, the way that I tend to talk about what I do is I work with the NHS to kind of help them navigate into this future, or arguably sometimes not to fall over themselves doing it. And so on the other side of things, I've worked with, I think it's 40 something health tech companies, I've kind of lost count now, around how they cannot fall over the NHS falling over themselves, really. So,
Yeah.
like going forward into this brave future, I think our main objective is just to not all fall over each other in a big pile. And I suppose part of my role is trying to make sure that I help us not do that.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, yeah, and I think that ties us firstly very nicely into the first question that I have for you, and something that
Mm.
you've wrote about recently on your LinkedIn. And I read your article and thought this is something that I can't not talk to you about. And this was surrounding people within the NHS at the moment having to build up their following and becoming sort of essentially mini influencers, if you like, to drive opportunity for themselves or, the wider industry. Just wanted to understand your thinking a bit more around this and share with our listeners, because your article says a lot. Most people will have read it, although there'll be some that haven't. So keen to just delve into it a little bit deeper.
Yeah, sure. So basically, I was trying to see if I could sort of, eat an elephant in one go in the shape of a small article, because I think at the core of it, what I was talking about and trying to talk about quite a lot, actually, I can see the book behind me, is how we're transitioning across towards new power, right? I should definitely get commissioned for this. I'm always flouting this particular topic, but actually, we're going into a new digital society and things are changing. And actually, this happens at a societal level, which we're seeing in the news now around, Elon Musk and riots and stuff like that, all the way down to how an individual like me, and I think I tried to make sure I use myself a bit as a case study, as, over
Mm.
the last couple of years, I suppose, like quite humbly sort of grown in terms of following and sort of got to a point where I kind of know that some of the things that I write can have some potency.
Yeah.
And it's got me reflecting quite a lot as I've been involved in, sort of organizing conferences and setting up agendas and so on around how the voices are starting to change. Previously in the NHS, we used to have people, and if they were given a job or a role, they would have power or
Mm.
influence because they're, the director of this or the director of that. But nowadays, we've also got this parallel thing that's heading up really quickly where we have, people like sort of, Dr. Professor Shafi, Dr. Professor Shafi, who has 50,000 followers, and
Yeah.
Hassan Chowdhury, who's got sort of something like close to 30, and all of these individuals who actually are not recognized as part of the institution, and maybe chuck myself to a lesser degree into this as well, but are kind of potently sort of pushing towards the system. I think particularly at a time when the system is really challenged and there's a lot of things that we need to be able to address. I think what my article was trying to do is to sort of think about how these voices are starting to come together and what the national bodies in the NHS can do to think about how this works, because new power, this is the world that we're going into and it's not going away really. And all of these individuals and sort of many more that are going to go over time will only grow in following. And I guess when you start to get people who maybe have 100, 200,000 followers in the NHS, but people working in that
Mm.
system, how does that start to change the dynamics a little bit? And I'm not trying to speak revolution in a revolutionary way, not today anyway, but I think, like, I think I'm really curious about it and how we manage to navigate that later, because it is starting to deconstruct and kind of disassemble some of the big sort of held known truths that there's the system, and the higher up the system you are, the more control you have and the more influence you have and the more your voice matters. And actually, like, you know, that's changing, and I think it's really interesting. And so, yeah, it led me to reflect personally upon what my responsibilities and roles were as a, I hate using the term, hate it, but influencer, you know, and what that means for me in making sure
Yeah.
that I'm not a firebrand, but someone who's speaking and thinking responsibly, like I would do if I did have an official role in the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. And how do you think it's actually impacted, I guess, the last, what, 6 months, a year of your life and the work that you're doing and the people that you're speaking to?
Yeah, like it's really interesting. Like, to be honest, I'm actually an introvert. I don't really like the spotlight, right? But like, you know, and I try not to make the stuff that I put up about me. But a couple of years ago, actually, when my father passed away, I kind of, you know, I work for myself. I've worked for myself pretty much for, I don't know, 16, 17 years in different ways and shapes and forms. And like, I think there was a period where I'd done a big piece of work and I kind of realized that I didn't have anything in the pipeline, and I was doing a lot of system work, and the system was getting harder. It was after COVID, and health tech had kind of been one of these things that was kind of like, it was like my side hustle, and I was like word of mouth, and I was kind of like a sort of, you know, I'd be passed from founder to founder, and I
Mm.
wasn't really doing much to talk about what I did. And it got a little bit sort of squeaky bum in terms of, you know, sort of being able to pay my mortgage and provide for my family. And I spent some time really looking at, well, like actually what provides more certainty and so on. So I've committed to writing articles. I've written, I don't know, 70 articles over the last couple of years. I've built my following up and stuff like that. And what I can say actually is it's been absolutely transformative. Like, I get stuff coming to me all the time. The favorite thing in the world is when someone goes, "Hey Liam, I've been following you for 6 months. I've read
Yeah.
loads of your articles, really like what you're talking about. We've got this thing, can we work together?" And, you know, I come to that where I've clearly written something that's resonated with people. They've come to me, and then they're saying sort of like, "I trust you, Liam. Like, I've got into your head. I can see what
Mm.
you do, and I can see your value, and I trust you." And I get this stuff all the time now. And, you know, going from a point where I was quite worried about the volatility of these times, like I think everyone is, and it's hard, like, you know, things are just generally hard for everyone. But I'm speaking to so many people at the moment who are really struggling to
Mm.
work out where the next thing comes from. And like, I consider myself very fortunate to have kind of taken this journey and now be in a position where I'm worrying much less. Like, yes, there's always quiet periods, like Perdar was a pain, you know, everyone kind of was like, let's just wait and stop. But other than that, generally in sort of day to day, it's worked out really, really well. And, you know, I think I do try to sort of, you know, show the good and the bad of doing it, because it's
Yeah,
also bloody hard work as well. Like, you've got to do more and more and more.
absolutely.
But it's been a really wonderful journey. Like, and it's helped me make
Amazing.
so many new friends and contacts and contracts actually, and get
Yeah.
opportunities and so on. So, you know, it's nice to feel part of a community and to be a voice within it.
Definitely. And I think, you know, with that, I would like to bring you kind of into my world, because I imagine watching this
I
right
mean,
now, some of our some of our contractors and freelancers that we
mm,
work with, and you've recently talked about some of the issues that, you know, they're facing with the problems with it, with IR35, etc.
mm.
With the stuff that you're doing as, you know, creating your own personal brand, if you like, and having a voice in this space, do you actually think now in the digital age it's super important for contractors, freelancers to be doing a similar thing?
I think it can only help, right? Like, you know, so I suppose just to go back to things that I was covering, what happened was I was
Yeah.
putting quite a lot of stuff about over the summer about some of the challenges, particularly in how some of the really strange ways that we think about money flows and so on. So, for example, we forgive debt for the trusts that are doing the best financially, but then we like intervene, and for those who aren't, we basically don't release their debt. So there's lots of different things. And I was spending a lot of time doing videos and talking about some of the mechanisms that people just don't know go on in the NHS. And so I started getting a load of people, namely actually people who are working in recruitment, who were saying, the situation is, I don't know if I can swear, it's screwed, right? The situation is screwed. They were saying other words, like expletives, right?
I'm
But
sure.
and because they were like, look, we've got all of these great people on our books. We've got these great contractors, you know, who inside, outside IR35, you know, and so on. Obviously, the IR35 rules have made things more difficult. Like, I remember when I started doing my consultancy or contracting. And I called up an agency. I was like, hi, I'm Liam. I'm a consultant. Can I have some consultancy work in the NHS? And they were like, yeah. And they got me 3 things in a week. And I went in and it was great. Nowadays, it's really
Not as
different.
easy.
And I guess what I sort of found was that these the agencies were coming to me and they were like, basically, we've got this, amount which has been given to agencies. Maybe it's like 450 quid a day. Contractors who would normally be charging 600-700 being pushed right down. They're still inside IR35. They can barely afford to kind of make this work. And there's no jobs around at the moment. And we get 50 quid per day off them. But then there's these like service integrators, these SIs, and they are taking the same people. They're winning these big contracts and nobody in the system likes this. They're really having to do it with gritted teeth because they need people. But they're paying 1,600 whilst the individual's still getting paid 400 at the moment, or maybe a little bit more. So I was talking about that and it kind of, like, I'm aware I haven't answered your question yet, but like it made me sort of very much sort of think around, well, like what do we need to do to make this work? Now, can everybody provide lots of thought leadership? No, but actually I think the thing is, when you go onto someone's LinkedIn profile, which is often where it happens at the moment, I think like, maybe we'll talk about assets later if you want to, but like I think I see LinkedIn as like a balance sheet to a certain degree, right? And people go on, they're like, all right, this is what I was educated and these are the jobs I've done, and here's a few bits. Like, we've moved so far from beyond the CV age where actually now there's loads of stuff that we can do, and even small things of just maybe writing a few articles or some case studies and putting them in your featured section and stuff like that. When someone comes to look at you, like when someone comes to look at my LinkedIn profile, right? I don't go for contract work. I haven't for years, right? But if someone comes to go for my thing, they know what I'm about, who I'm about. They can see what they think about me, and they can, as I said, they can kind of get that measure of me, whether, it's for a non-executive role or whatever that might be. And I think more and more we need to, like, people who are contracting need to try and maybe build up a bit of a following, get more activity, because, companies will take you and then you're part of that. Now, obviously, don't be as critical as I am or be a firebrand, because then they won't, the NHS won't want to work with you. But I think, not that I try to be a firebrand, I try to be responsible, but I think the question I'd be asking if I was looking at my profile is, what's my balance sheet look like? And, can people see that I've got vision and ideas and things that I can bring to this role? Or is this just a CV? And I think the world's changing, and actually if, individuals want to drive consistent work, to get the work that they want to do the most interesting kind of projects, I think you've got to take that leap. And to be honest, I sort of saw my leap as an inevitability. It just had to be done because this is the way the world is at the moment. So yeah, I hope that answered the question. I kind of went around the houses a little bit.
No, it's useful context, and I totally agree. I mean, more often than not now, we have contractors coming to us and saying, please get me in front of this client because I know that I can do the work, but my CV, it doesn't say enough or doesn't show the ideas and the value that I can bring. And as a recruiter, if we know them, believe in them, have seen the projects they've worked on previously, we have a job to do ourselves to make sure that they do get in front of these clients and are given the opportunity. But I think you're right in terms of the role of LinkedIn and also more generally social media that plays in kind of opinions and the world that we live in now, a much larger part than it used to, for sure.
Yeah, and also just to add, like, not every opportunity will come from someone going to an agency that you might be talking to, right? It might just be, we're thinking about this, or they maybe speak to, like, I had one where there was a headhunter who came to me about a relatively high profile role, and they said, the people have asked whether we can ask you to apply. And I didn't want the job, but I don't want a job, but like, I was interested that they'd seen me and they were like, maybe Liam would be interested. And I think, in this sense, there are opportunities out there, but you've got to broaden the visibility of others to be able to see that you're around and that you're an interesting person to kind of to take on, right?
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I think, the interesting then part of this is talking about more broad, and I'm going to ask you to answer a question here that is probably would naturally take hours and hours, but see if you can do it. Here's the task. Just in regards to actual health tech companies themselves, obviously you speak to many of them, especially when it comes to the kind of digital aspect. It's becoming a super crowded market, right? And the NHS is pretty overwhelmed with different digital health founders coming to them and saying, look what I've created, this is the, this is what benefit we can have to you. So how do you stand out in such a crowded market nowadays? And I'm specifically talking about, UK, NHS, wider healthcare ecosystem.
Yeah, that is
Loaded question.
it's the killer question at the moment, isn't it? And it's the question people ask me all the time. Like,
Sure.
but for my sins, I offered out like 8 strategy sessions to companies, like 2-hour strategy sessions that they could buy, and like I'm just about halfway through working with those. And I think for every single company, it's very much like, how do we get eyes in front of people at the moment, and how do we actually kind of get further? I think that there is a slightly problematic circle in the health tech industry a little bit, that someone once decided that they were gonna put out a big flashy thing about a flashy solution and like a cartoon video and a bunch of stuff where they just chuck a load of buzzwords on and hope that someone's going to come to it and go, I want this solution. They're going to run in and chuck that shiny thing in and make it work. Like I do a lot of work with health tech companies, and also like, as you're aware, Ellis, I'm in the process of readying to release a course, a very comprehensive one around this topic and a number of others. But like, ultimately, I think it's relatively straightforward that if we think about the individuals, like first, obviously, we've got to get their eyes, but then we've also got to get their time, we've got to get their trust, and we've got to get them to, go from a point where in the NHS, they may look at a provider and have a negative view of trust of them. That's the cultural engagement between the NHS and private sector. And so we need to kind of, be able to kind of get to that point where we just get them above that line so they're starting to trust us. And to be honest, I think problem orientation, like I do and teach design thinking. I think it sort of sits in everything that I do nowadays, Ellis. And like, for me, I don't know, like I'm not a salesperson, but I do commercial stuff, right? I built an organization. I had to do selling for it because we had to grow, like many founders find themselves in that situation. But to me, it feels very simple, right? We want to meet someone somewhere and we want to get them somewhere. And getting them somewhere is wanting to work together, championing you, putting together a case, putting time and energy into thinking about how they'd use you, prioritize you over something else, and hopefully then take that forward. And, if it's your first customer or you're relatively small, probably do a lot of work to sort of help sort of, iron out the creases of those issues. So
yeah,
where do we meet them? Well, for me, we've got to meet them where they are. And we've got to assume that they don't know all of the mechanics of their problem. Or if they do, we want to empathize with them and meet them. So what I would say is the most important thing is that we're putting out stuff which focuses on the problem we solve and the problems that people experience. I see in marketing that it's like scary, funny, or sexy. Now, I can't do sexy, and I have a go at funny. I don't know how I do on it, right? But like, actually, it's scary times at the moment. You ask most people in the NHS, right? Generally, there's a number of things that they're just trying to stop happening. And so realistically, a proposition to them is, what's the risk? What's going to happen? What's going to go wrong? What are the things, the different layers that people might be experiencing? Maybe that be supply and demand. They've got, growing waiting lists and staff are going down. It might be they've got targets and objectives. They've got less money. They've got to deliver savings. And trying to kind of meet them at their picture and show that you understand. And then try to create a golden thread that takes step by step by step that helps them to maybe understand some strategic objectives that could be able to think about doing this, go into a bit of the detail about what are the kind of things that would help to solve this, and then get into the solution. 95% of the health tech company go, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at my solution, look, aren't I shiny, industry award. They're all trying to impress each other. But for me, the people you need to impress are conservative. They don't trust you. They've got loads of problems. They may not necessarily know how to solve those problems. And we've got to meet them where they are. And what I would want as a reader, someone who I'm in the NHS and you're trying to get my attention, is something that empathizes with me and helps to connect with me in a way that helps to improve my thinking. And so this is where thought leadership comes in. I'm a really big fan of thought leadership. Well, at least attempting it in my articles as well, right? I'm not going to attribute the title to myself, but like, what is leadership, right? Go on LinkedIn and everyone's asking the same question with like Gandhi quotes and stuff, right? But leadership is like helping people to take steps forward in a way that's just not doing it for them, right? We need to meet them where they are, and we need to help them take that journey. And I see very few companies who are actually doing that well. So, it's a really big, there's lots of other elements. For example, peer validation. Can the biggest influencer of an NHS organisation is another NHS organisation. Incentives might play a role in where you can actually get their interest in a different kind of way in this new landscape. Like there's lots of different things. But, in order to get that, I think to stand out, you've got to understand the problems you're solving. You've got to articulate it. You've got to meet the people there and then have something that takes them through. So like, I know I can go on for 6 hours because I'm in recording 6 hours of talking about this kind of stuff. But like, to me, that's probably the most important thing that I would say.
I do want to come on to the incentives part that you just mentioned there, because I think that's really important. But firstly, I guess, why do you think it is that companies, health tech companies, are struggling to really identify the problems that their customers are facing? Is it, a lack of understanding? Is it hiring the wrong salespeople? Is it brushing them with a broad stroke and having really wrong assumptions? Like, is there something that you could,
many
all
reasons,
of them, all three?
right? So firstly, we need to recognise that NHS and tech industry are culturally alien to each other, right? You go in a startup and you go in an NHS, an NHS head office, and you look at the two, they do and think everything is different, right? Like the thing I always say to NHS organisations when I'm teaching them is tech companies don't need a digital strategy. You really do, because they just think and breathe and live it, right? It's just constant creative disruption and improvement. So firstly is that we've got two groups and there's a chasm between them, right? So I think, the first thing that I'd say is probably lack of understanding of the NHS. The NHS is really hard to understand. There's no guides out at the moment, although soon, but there's no guides out at the moment about how to understand the NHS, right? And there is contracting mechanisms, and like I go into strategy sessions, I'm like, do you know about this? And do you know this? And I'm like, no, where would I find out about this? And I'm like, oh, here's some really niche link to this place that explains how the NHS payment scheme will change this, that, and the other, or what Confed's written or Health Foundation have written. And the NHS is opaque and confusing for many. Most people who, even the I get a lot of doctors who come to me and they're like, I don't even know where to begin with how a local integrated care system would work and how commissioning would work and so on. So the NHS is a beast. It's the most complex human system around, right? Period. But then also on the tech industry, I think, there's pools, there is a culture where I think sometimes there can be a bit of oversimplification, naivety, a bit of arrogance that can happen. There's investors who maybe also have oversimplification, naivety, and arrogance who are saying, we'll do this and go here and make this and get this within this period. I mean, there's actually, it's not based on any knowledge of the system itself. And I think, there's also culture, culture, it sort of, it scoops up some of the noobs coming into the system, the noobs coming into the system. And, like you come in, you're like, what are the health tech companies that I know doing? And people replicate that. And culture can be sort of replicative, right? And I think sometimes people come in and they think that's the way to get attention when they're looking at 95% of the companies who are not getting attention, but they're getting their attention. And I think sometimes there's this kind of view that like whoever told someone that you should say revolutionizing? Nobody in the NHS. Like if you say we're going to revolutionize an area to someone in the NHS, they will close the door as quickly as they can. But everyone's doing it. Everyone's making these grand statements. And I think, there is this element. I think tech is complex. Like, there's a lot of people who've come into sort of commercial from the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry, which is an area that, the organisation we built was around evidence-based pathways and medicines and so on. And we work quite a lot with the pharmaceutical industry in terms of, we did stuff for the NHS and then they come and told us they didn't like what we were doing or they loved it and, whatever. But pharmaceutical is so much more straightforward, right? It's a very different beast. And yet you've got a lot of people who come in and think we can just sell throughout the year. But actually, when you've got business case processes and understanding the financial year and stuff like that, like there's a whole number of different areas that you need to get right. And I think patience, restraint, sophistication, like proactivity, a lot of companies just go, well, we'll do this when it comes. But when it comes, they're then just really reactive to it, and they're spending all their time being sort of dragged around by the nose when they could have understood this and been more proactive. So I wouldn't just put this necessarily to the sales individuals, but I think there's also that culture that these people can come in and, I wrote an article ages ago, and we just need an introduction. And to be honest, I get companies who say, oh no, we don't need any strategic support. And they've got no strategy. And they go, we just need an introduction. And I go, all right, let me ask you some questions. And I realized that the NHS will chew them up and spit them out. But they think if we get that introduction, we'll get the opportunity. The NHS has a high bar. It crushes companies. And so I think it's the holistic series of different things on it.
Okay, cool. And I know that you were mentioning around incentives earlier, and something I was fascinated about when reading another one of your articles, clearly I'm a fan, around assets and, the concept of assets, selling assets, etc. I thought it'd be good just to explain a little bit more about this to my listeners as well.
Okay, cool. So let's start with incentives and trade-offs. So firstly, I think quite often, particularly for companies that are trying to go to the NHS, they kind of feel that the NHS is so puritanical that they can't do trade-offs and exchange of value. But when you're doing some of the earlier stage things, like if you're selling your 69th version of your thing to just another trust, then you're kind of in a place where you're pushing, you've got your value, you're selling your value. But for some of the other ones, I think sometimes, I think companies know it. To get that work to happen, as I said, like the first organization helping to iron the creases out and work out how it's sort of practically applicable or situationally done, so they can get proof of how it would work with training and behavior and change and changing pathways and stuff like that. I think when we consider those, what we end up with is almost like an imbalance of it. So we go, we'll give you a pilot, or we'll do this thing for you, we won't charge you much, but actually we're going to expect all of these things. And the company is secretly thinking, we really like to get testimonials, we'd really like to do some videos, we'd really like to get an HSJ award, we'd really like to get some people, all of these things that maybe an individual does want that. There's a lot of individuals in the system who, really want to do it because it's the right thing. There's some who want to do it to elevate their career and get that award themselves, or to recognize their work. But often I think companies kind of find that the input is so big from the provider that it can be really difficult to convince them that it's worth their time and effort. And so I think in this one, I talk about, in my course again, trade-offs and incentives. And so trade-offs is, well, we'll do this in exchange. So it could, if you do this, then we want to recognize your value, and we'll maybe try and find a way to do a gain share, or a way that we can do something to share the risk. And actually, this comes from the Pharma Playbook. Like, I helped set up the sort of national process around pharmaceutical industry scheme rebates. And, that one was saying, if you can improve us moving towards non-oral anticoagulants, we will help to reduce this down. And, there's lots of different offers where they were saying, well, we'll do a gain share or a risk share with you. And that principle still applies in organizations. But also, in terms of incentives, it may be that companies want to have, and now not every trust wants to do this, systems might be less likely to do this than some of the trusts, but to actually say, look, if you can work with us to prove that we're there, and we can get our next big contract or whatever, we'll give you 20% off. Like most straightforward is, we'll give you 20% off the next 4 trusts that come, until you end up getting it for free because you've put the time and effort into it. Or if we take SenseSign, for example, and there was an Imperial paper on this a while ago, like SenseSign took data and exchanged it for equity. And there's been a lot of work nationally that's been looking at that. And so logically, and I've done this work with a few clients over the years, and it's been quite successful, there is, I don't think people know, but there is a bit of a receptiveness around, can we use this? Can we use this, to bring the scale of balance to make it more fair? So we're rewarding you for taking a chance on us. And I think, to be honest, from that line, as long as it's not to individuals, which is totally improper, as long as it's above board and it's done properly and it's in writing, like, I don't know, like I don't have a problem with us helping to reward NHS organisations for helping to take the time on this, and it serves both parties.
Absolutely.
It doesn't work in every scenario, but I think there's always some scenario where you can at least have that conversation around recognising the value that they're bringing to it, and also getting it locked into, so you can get those testimonials and stuff like that agreed with the organisation.
Amazing.
I didn't answer assets, did I?
And Yeah, did you want to touch on assets? I know it's something else that you've been talking a little bit about recently.
If you want me to, like you're the controller. I'm just the mouthpiece you've got on today, right?
Yeah,
Um,
sure, but I think it ties in quite nicely with that incentives piece.
yeah. So I think, if we look at the NHS, like you look at the culture at the NHS, going back to the previous one, like, when I talk about assets, like there's, and I teach this in digital strategy actually, like what's the difference between an asset and a debt? A debt is something you have to service, right?
Mhm.
And an asset is something that works for you. And with my clients and in my course, like a lot of this stuff is really, really, really focused around how can we do our ABC? How can we always build collateral, always build assets? And I think sometimes I go into companies who are selling to the NHS and they kind of go, I go, what have you got? What have you got to work with? What quotes or videos and stuff like this? What have we got that can help support your story? And they go, oh, we've got this quote here and we've got this thing and this person did this 6 months ago. And they're like really asset bare. Now, with the NHS is reluctant to engage, likes to lurk. They don't want to have conversations until they trust you, until they go above that level and they're ready.
Mm,
And so for the NHS, and particularly when you're talking about like governance and stuff like that, where there's other stakeholders who are quite important who don't want to engage with you or may not want to engage with you, assets become really critical. So when you're putting stuff out to these organizations in the right kind of way, they can work for you where you might not be able to get that meeting and sort of convince them around these things. So I suppose the asset approach, and to be honest, I think this comes back to the balance sheet of LinkedIn as we were talking in the beginning.
yeah,
We live in a digital world. Digital means that we can create something like a video, which can be used asynchronously at any point. And I think, it can be distributed anywhere. It can be used in different ways. We can repurpose it. We can put it through three AI tools and turn it into a script or something like that. And I think every company should be thinking repurpose, 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 get our
mm,
assets, repurpose our assets, and try and just use that and to bring it together in a way that really makes it look like you are valid and credible and robust and not so just another new company that
yeah.
might not really have anything behind you. And I think assets can do that in a way that the founder or the brand can't always necessarily do.
Definitely. It's about having a voice that, it doesn't necessarily have to be a certain opinion like how you would do with a thought leadership piece, for example. It's just about having different assets that make you different to such a crowded market at the moment.
Mm. And like
Uh,
founder, like I was talking to a founder the other day, and the question I get quite a lot from founders is like, I need my team to go and do this. I've got to focus on this, this, and this, right?
yeah.
How do I keep that approach that maybe I did in the early days?
Hmm.
Maybe play some kind of role in the sales process. So it's not some BDR who's talking to a CIO in a trust. How do I play a role without becoming overwhelmed? And I think that the answer is always, let's bottle you. Think about the high value points that you can engage and try and think about how do we create some personalized videos that we can send? How
Okay.
do we do something like that where we can build up these assets where, you know, you talking about stuff. And I think, like we almost kind of need to digitize the founders where they're doing the most high impact stuff at that time, and because I think it's one that I get quite a lot.
Yeah, that's really nice. Well, thank you for your thoughts, Liam. I always like to end with this. We're nearly towards the end of 2024 now, but
Yeah.
predictions for the digital health med tech sector for the rest of this year, next year, anything you see on the horizon?
Um,
Putting you on the spot.
well, to borrow from Wes Streeting himself, no investment without major surgery is the theme at the moment. You've only got to look at the budget to see that we're not getting
Yeah.
money flow. However, there have been previous commitments that have been made that I think it'll be interesting to see how they interpret them and where they redeploy it, because obviously that they have, for example, the budget of what that was previously £3.4 million, so it's quite a lot. So look, we're in a transitionary year. I think, realistically, when a new government comes in at the moment, we've got a new government that's in, most of their influence will be on the following financial year, because you
Hmm.
can't change some of the big things within financial year, particularly the contractual frameworks and stuff. So I think, to be honest, I did this, I got this question at the NIA when I did a talk actually. Like, to be honest, I kind of think this year is still going to just be a hard bit of a write. I think, the storm isn't over. Like maybe we've kind of passed the eye of the storm and we know things are going to get better, but we've still got that other part of the storm to kind of hit
Yeah.
us. And I think thriving is surviving in this landscape. And I think hopefully by the next financial year, there might be some things. I think the Darcy review will allow the government to maybe go, look, it's worse than we thought. We need to invest more than we intended, and to be able to kind of put more into the NHS. Who knows? So I think, yeah, in that sense, more pain for until the 1st of April. And then once we get the contractual frameworks and the operational plans out in the end of December and the beginning of February and so on, I think the picture will be much clearer around next year.
Okay. So 2025 is hopefully the year.
Oh, 2025. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Liam. Great to chat. And obviously, if anybody has any questions for Liam, please feel free to reach out to him directly via LinkedIn. But yeah, thanks so much for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me along, Ellis.